So you got 16,000 women who were able to sniff out, I don't think so. I'm not going to participate in a study that dictates that I have to be induced and I don't have the option to go into spontaneous labor on my own. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. All right, you guys. This week, we are doing something that we've done in the past, and you guys really, really loved it. And I also really, really love it because I get to connect with you in a different way than giving you advice in the way of a topic or a deep dive or reviewing scientific articles or interviewing a guest. Today we are doing a Q&A from Instagram and social media. Not only did I put up a box for you guys to ask me questions, but I also, on the daily, I'm not kidding, I get 10, 20, 30 questions, and I really do mean every single day. So I never want you to feel like I'm not answering your questions, but our DMs are really a mess. And so this is a really fun way for me to be able to answer your questions, connect with you, and then give you the resources that you guys are looking for. So I'm so excited to do this. Let's just kind of dive in. So my first question that I'm going to cover is, hi, HeHe, what's your opinion on the doctor and anatomy scan? The doctor's telling you that you are going to have a 9.5 pound baby and cannot deliver naturally. Well, first of all, a 9.5 pound baby may not necessarily be a 9.5 pound baby. We know that ultrasounds are not very accurate in terms of estimating fetal weight. And we know two other things. The later you are in your pregnancy, so the closer to your due date or past your due date, the more inaccurate it is. And the larger your baby, the more inaccurate it is. In terms of estimating fetal weight, when babies are estimating really, really small, a lot of times the estimated weight is more accurate. But when babies are being estimated to be really, really big, most of the time those babies come out really normal and average size. As far as your provider telling you that you can't have a natural delivery, I think that is a bunch of bullshit, caca, malarkey. It's totally not evidence-based at all. And I think that is not a supportive provider. Now, I don't necessarily know how they presented it to you. Maybe they counseled you in a really respectful way and they told you that larger babies are a little bit harder to push out. And that can be true. But if they didn't also follow that up with, but you can do it, and big, huge babies, 9, 10, 11, 12 pounds are born every day vaginally, then I think they did you a real disservice. You can absolutely have a natural, unmedicated, if you want, vaginal delivery with a 9.5 pound baby. And don't forget that the likelihood that your child is actually 9.5 pounds is relatively small. I do think that a couple of things for you to know is that having an upright labor and upright birthing. So not just the upright labor, which a lot of people do really well, but then when it comes time to pushing your baby out, a lot of people will be on their back. Whether you choose that or whether your hospital staff puts you in that position, if you know that you're likely to have a big baby or you're estimated to have a big baby, it is uber uber important for you to have an upright labor, which means upright first stage, upright second stage. You should be doing early labor, active labor, transition upright. It doesn't mean that you can't rest. Certainly take rest, take naps as needed, do lying down positions, but just don't stay there, okay? So if you need to take a nap, I always tell my clients, don't stay in a napping position or a lie down position for more than 2 or 3 hours. Get up and get moving. Even if you have an epidural and you're not unmedicated, then make sure that you're still utilizing upright positions. Get in hands and knees, use the peanut ball, raise the back of the bed. You can do so much upright with an epidural or unmedicated. And if you have hospital staff that's telling you any different, you should ask for a new nurse or a new doctor. Okay, the next question is, how do I go about getting information on vaccines for baby and which ones to pass on? I'm lost and super close to birth. Well, first and foremost, obviously, everyone is aware that the CDC has information about vaccines. HealthyChildren.org is also a government-funded website that is in conjunction with the AAP. All of those are going to have government-based information for vaccines. 2 other websites that are really informative for you. Number 1 is evidence-based births. I'm sure you're familiar, but if you're not, it's evidencebasedbirths.com. And then just the inserts. My friend Alexandra, who has been on the podcast, actually just recently, if you go back just a couple episodes, we actually talk about informed consent when it comes to pharmaceutical products. And she's really big on informed consent. And so what her mission is she goes into the pharmaceutical inserts in a variety of pharmaceutical products, and she breaks down exactly what the manufacturers of those products say, suggest, warn about, and otherwise educate people on within the inserts. That's justtheinserts.com, and you'll be able to look up all of the vaccines for children as well as those medications that they give after birth, which is erythromycin eye cream, vitamin K, and Hep B. If you're looking for some reading materials that are a little bit more balanced, but maybe not so pro-vaccine, I'm going to read out a list of books that you can read. One is called The Vaccine Book by Dr. Sears. The Vaccine Friendly Plan by Dr. Paul Thomas and Dr. Jennifer Margulis. Another one is What Your Doctor Won't Tell You About Vaccines. Calling the Shots, Why Parents Reject Vaccines. And then Vaccines, Autoimmunity, and the Changing Nature of Childhood Illness. If you're looking for vaccine-friendly pediatricians or pediatricians that are open to alternative vax schedules in your area, 2 resources. One is going to be Facebook, just asking in your local mom group about pediatricians that are open to alternative schedules and a little bit more vaccine friendly is a really great place to start. If you don't feel safe doing that, another resource is Dr. Ashley Mayer on Instagram. You can find her at Dr. Green Mom, so green like the color, Dr. Green Mom, and that's also her website. She actually has a list of pediatricians in every single state that are vax friendly and open to alternative schedules. However, it doesn't mean that those pediatricians are going to be in your area, but same thing as birth, sometimes it is absolutely worth driving to find the care that you and your child deserve and that makes you feel most confident in the choices that you are making so that you can feel like your healthcare and your child's healthcare is aligned with your family's goals. Up next, hey HeHe, I'm 39 weeks and my OB is really pushing me to induce. I really do not want to be induced and my baby looks good. Fluid levels are good too. At first, they said to induce because I was 39 weeks, and now they've changed to saying my baby is going to be big. I was wondering your thoughts on this. sounds like bullshit to me. So number one, we know that 39-week induction is not for everybody, and we know that the data that the hospitals use is very flawed. They typically refer to the ARRIVE trial, which not only was really shoddy data because no one in that trial, no one in that study recorded how they induced women. Therefore, we can't replicate those results, but also the results that they push as seemingly so, transformative was really only a 3% difference. So if you're willing to take on the risk of an induction, meaning the cascade of interventions, all the interventions that are included in an induction, the increased risk of C-section, which I know negates the supposed outcomes of the ARRIVE trial. But one thing to understand is that the ARRIVE trial set out to prove that 39-week induction was better, and they did that. Any study that sets out to prove something instead of just looking at two different things. So, for example, a better hypothesis for them, instead of 39-week induction is better than spontaneous labor, would have been, does 39-week induction lower the risk of C-section compared to spontaneous labor? But that's not what they did. They really set out to prove that 39-week induction lowers that risk. And what they found was they asked over 22,000 women to participate in that study, and just over 6,000 did. So, the 22 minus 6 is 16. So you got 16,000 women who were able to sniff out, I don't think so. I'm not going to participate in a study that dictates that I have to be induced and I don't have the option to go into spontaneous labor on my own. Now, if you wanted an induction, then the ARRIVE trial is going to be awesome data for you to rely back on. But since you specifically said you don't want an induction and there's no medical reason for you to have an induction, you look great, your baby looks great, the fluids look great, you are allowed to say no to that. Also, did you know that even if you weren't looking great, even if your baby wasn't looking great, you still have the right to decline anything that is suggested to you? Yeah, you do. ACOG recognizes that. They recognize that women who are competent and able to make decisions have every right to decline any and all medical interventions, even if, they literally say, even if it were to cause harm to them or their baby. So if you don't want an induction and you don't agree with your provider's suggestions, then simply don't have an induction. You don't have to agree to it. If they force you to put it on the calendar, you don't have to show up. And the fact that they have changed from, you're 39 weeks and that didn't work, so now they're trying to use a big baby as the reason, for me, feels like they're trying to scare you into what they want you to do, and that's called medical manipulation. That is straight up obstetrical coercion. Not only is that unprofessional, but it's also highly unethical. I do encourage you to report this behavior if you feel so inclined. Really great places to do that would be report them to the hospital that you're being cared by, but also to your state's medical board, and just let them know that your doctor is engaging in unethical medical manipulation. I'm so pro turning in doctors, because until we start to hold this medical system accountable, we're never going to see a cultural change. The hospital system will continue to assert dominance and try to control women in a way that is, in fact, very unethical. Okay, this is a good one, you guys. This question says, what do you do when they say, quote unquote, it's policy? For example, with my second, I really wanted to get in the tub and they said no because they broke my waters. And I asked over and over again and they kept saying no, blaming it on hospital policy. Well, you have two options. Number one, you can say, I understand the policy and I decline it. And number two, you simply walk yourself into the bathroom and you fill up that tub and you put your body in it. Now, in some labor rooms, you need a medical staff to fill up the tub. Sometimes it's not like a regular bathtub like what we would find in our hospital room. And I think in those cases, it can be really tough because then you're asking the provider to do something that is against the hospital policy, which is written for them to follow, not for you to follow. So you must understand, hospital policy is actually written to avoid litigation. Most hospital policies are not written in a way that guarantees improved outcomes. However, it does almost guarantee that the hospital will avoid getting into hot water and into legal trouble because the policy is written to protect the staff in the hospital. So if you're in a labor room that has a tub that you do need hospital staff to help you fill it up, I think you have a couple of options. The first option is going to be the kindest and the gentlest and probably most likely to get you a way into the tub. I would recommend bringing a nurse in and just leveling with her, to be completely honest. I understand the hospital policy. It is super, super, super important to me that I use the tub. I think it will progress my labor. I understand the risk. I'm willing to take on that risk. How can you help me as my patient advocate? Because nurses are your patient advocate. They don't work for the doctor. They are not beholden to that doctor. Although some unit cultures do make it feel as if they are beholden to those doctors. And some unit cultures do have a culture where if a nurse goes against what a doctor says, they do have pretty severe repercussions that they may pay. So do think about that. Keep it in mind that it's not always just that your nursing staff is being hard to deal with. Sometimes there are things at play that are not obvious and that you may not necessarily be privy to. But you can have a very straightforward, open-hearted conversation. I like to call this a come to Jesus meeting. And you just lay it all out on the line. And you just simply say, it would be super helpful for me if I was able to use the tub. I know that you are an advocate for me, and I'm really hoping that we can find something that works for both of us. I certainly don't want to get you in trouble, and I don't want you to have any repercussions to pay, but I also know that it is my right to decline hospital policy, and I'm declining this one, so I really want to get in the tub. How can we make that work? The second thing that you can do, and that's in addition to the conversation that you just had, it's like an extra little buy-in that you could use, is maybe you throw out there, I'm happy to sign an AMA. I'm happy to sign an AMA saying that I understand the risk of getting in the tub and using hydrotherapy post waters breaking, which is typically just the risk of infection. But as long as the hospital has sterilized and cleaned their equipment really well, the risk of infection is quite low. I've never seen anyone, I've been a doula for 10 years, and I've never seen anyone acquire an infection from using a tub after their waters break. And it is actually quite a common practice in home birth. So that should give you a little bit of kind of a stake in the ground, knowing kind of what's normal, what's not normal outside of the hospital system. I'm also based in Boston, and we don't have a hospital here that has a policy. You're allowed to get in the tub pre-waters break-in, post-waters break-in, doesn't matter. You can use the tubs all throughout labor. So just for you to know, that is specific to your hospital, and it is absolutely not evidence-based. The third thing is a little bit unhinged, but it certainly is an option. And depending on how bold you want to be, you could literally just say, I'm going to fill up this tub, or you can fill up this tub, but I'm getting in that tub. And then you kind of hold their hand to whatever happens next, happens next. Maybe that nurse really does say, I cannot help you fill up that tub. All right, well then I would walk over there and I would fill it up. And you know what? If it takes you a bit of a learning curve, then hopefully you don't flood the floor. And if you get it right the first time, then lucky you. And if the nurse wants to stand by and give you instructions, but not actually participate in filling up the tub, then maybe that's a happy medium. I wouldn't suggest starting there. It is a bit bold and it's definitely not going to be in favor. You're not going to win over the nurses and the doctors. And you may even have someone higher up like an OBGYN or the charge nurse or the head of OB come in and speak to you. But if it is really, really important to you, you can absolutely just hold your ground, especially once you're in there. They can't move your body without your permission. That is called medical assault. And so once you're in the tub, if you feel good there, no matter how many times they ask you to get out, you don't have to get out. Do keep in mind the risk that you're taking on. It may cause your hospital staff to treat you kind of nastily. You may face a lot of pushback from the hospital staff, and you can expect tension for probably the rest of your stay because now you have called their hand and you have put them in a situation where they are not comfortable with and they know that they have the potential to get in trouble. Also, keep in mind that you're taking on the risk of that infection that we spoke about, and make sure that you're evaluating any sort of other medical indications that you may need to get out of the tub. One of those would be postpartum hemorrhage, or if you don't have a provider who's comfortable delivering in the tub and you're not comfortable delivering your own baby. Anytime that we directly go against hospital policy, we have to be okay taking on that radical responsibility because there will be a line in the sand that your hospital staff is not willing to cross. And so then it leaves you having to cross that line yourself, i.e., you may have to deliver your own baby because a doctor is not going to feel comfortable reaching down and delivering your baby for you. Piggybacking off this entire conversation, I want to remind you to be paying attention in your prenatals to how aligned you actually are to your provider, your hospital, and the policies, because the worst thing you can do is willingly birth at a place that is not aligned with you, with a provider that doesn't respect you. And when I say willingly, it's because I want to hold a lot of recognition for the fact that so much of America is a healthcare desert, and that changing providers and having access to multiple birth facilities is not always an option for everybody. And so sometimes it's not willingly. Sometimes you don't have any other options and you're literally forced to birth at this hospital because your nearest hospital is 4 hours away and possibly even in a different state. If you find yourself constantly at odds with your provider and you are feeling really not heard and you don't have a lot of options of other places to go or other providers to see, I highly, highly, highly recommend you join the Birth Lounge or download the Birth Lounge app. That is literally what I teach you. I teach you how to get your needs met in a hospital setting with providers who don't always see eye to eye with you. If you are birthing at a hospital that has a rotating on-call schedule, or you're birthing at a hospital that you don't get to meet all of the providers before your labor, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you also join the Birth Lounge or download the Birth Lounge app, considering that you will not know who is going to show up to your labor and whether or not they are going to respect your autonomy, respect your consent, and respect your preferences in labor. And I want you to know how to navigate those situations before you're in labor. You're not going to be able to flip a switch and all of a sudden be able to advocate for yourself in labor if you haven't done the work to practice it in labor and build that toolbox of skills before before you are actually having your baby. So go ahead and do that now. Choose an out of hospital childbirth education. And I know I'm a little biased, but I personally think the Birth Lounge is the best one because not only does it teach you what your options are, but it teaches you how to actually get your goals met, which I feel like so many childbirth eds leave that out. They teach you what your options are, but then a lot of people walk into the hospital system and the doctors are like, well, you can't do that, and nobody has taught you what to say and do in those situations so that you can remain in control of the decisions made in your labor. And that's exactly what I do in the Birth Lounge. Okay, this next question is a really interesting one. It says, because my waters broke at 38 weeks, they said I would get an infection if I did not induce. My son's heart rate plummeted at one point during induction. And even though everything turned out fine, I regret doing it. Is the infection after waters breaking an exaggeration? Can't they just give antibiotics? I was induced twice with my 3 kids, and 2 of my inductions just felt very wrong. So first of all, the risk of infection certainly increases after your waters have broken because there is no longer a barrier to keeping bacteria out. With that being said, we know that the number one cause of infection during labor is cervical checks. So one thing that you could consider doing to mitigate the risk, especially after your waters have broken, is to decline cervical checks that are unnecessary. So when I say unnecessary, I mean cervical checks that are not going to change the outcome or change what you do next. So if you're getting a cervical exam because the doctor just recommends it, then maybe consider not doing it. If this is a cervical exam that is being offered or suggested because it has just been 2-4 hours and that's what hospital policy says, then consider declining it and maybe waiting another 2 or 4 hours to get a cervical check. However, if it's going to change the outcome or what you do next, then it is one that is worth considering getting, i.e., you're trying to decide if you're going to stay at the hospital or go back home. That is a cervical exam that would give you information that would inform your next step. You're trying to decide whether you should utilize IV pain medication like Nubain or Stadol, or if you should just get the epidural. That is a cervical exam that would help inform your next decision. So you can see how sometimes cervical checks are necessary and needed and will give you valuable information, and then sometimes they are just routine and they will not give you valuable information, and those are the cases that you probably want to consider not accepting because the risk of infection does come with every single cervical exam, and it compounds, meaning one cervical exam has this amount of risk, but once you have 2, it increases that risk, and 3 increases the risk, and then 4 and 5 and 6, and the more cervical exams you have, the more risk you hold with having an infection. Now, as far as your question about can't they just give antibiotics, yes, they absolutely can. However, you want to think about that. Anytime that you or your baby get an infection, we start to worry about other things. For newborns particularly, it's how are they going to transition on the outside once they're born if their body is trying to fight off an infection, and it increases their risk for other infections like sepsis. In addition to that, you probably want to consider the impacts of antibiotics on things like your microbiome and your gut health, and not just yours, but your baby's as well. Anytime a baby is born to a mom that has an infection in birth, they are going to require a little bit of monitoring, and they have an increased risk of possibly being admitted to the NICU. Not all babies born to moms with with infections are going to need a NICU admission, but all of them will require additional monitoring, and some of them are going to require a NICU stay. So yes, they can just administer antibiotics, but it's not just as simple as that. There are other things to consider with that as well. The next question reads, I'm really intrigued to learn the actual statistics for breech birth complications. I know that brain damage from lack of oxygen is such a common fear, but just how likely is it? So what you're talking about is commonly called entrapment, and it's where the body of the baby is delivered and then their head gets trapped in the mom's pelvis or her vagina, and we typically see a lack of oxygen or hypoxia be a result of that. However, we know that entrapment is quite rare when you birth with a breech trained provider. Now, you guys know I am so pro breech birth. I think that we could drastically reduce our nation's C-section rate if we would begin to train OBs and midwives in breech birth and how to safely attend those births and safely deliver breech babies. An organization that does this really, really well is Breech Without Borders, and their founder is Dr. Rixa Fries, who I actually had on the podcast, and we talk about the safety of breech birth in episode 179. So not only can you check out breechwithoutborders.com, but also head to episode 179 to hear me break down the safety and the risk of breech birth with Dr. Rixa Fries. Are you a doula that wants to grow and scale your business? Well, the good news is I'm finally launching something that you guys have asked me for years. You guys have been begging me to create a program to help you scale and grow your existing business, and I'm doing just that. On May 5th, our class launches for our business accelerator for doulas. You should be a doula who has already taken 1 to 2 clients a month, but you are craving more, and I'm going to teach you exactly how to do that. This is an 8-week small group coaching program, 6 weeks of group coaching, and then 2 weeks of one-to-one coaching calls with me and a business mentor, and we are going to dive deep into your business to help you soar. We're going to be covering everything you need to know to absolutely blow up your business. We're talking scaling your offers, nailing down your pricing, securing additional clients, growing on social media, navigating hospital policy and tricky situations with clients, plus improving your practice as a doula. You are going to go from grinding and wondering if you nailed that last client interview to absolutely being confident in taking claim as the it doula in your area. People are going to be knocking down your door to work with you. I launched my business back in 2016, and I now bring in over $500,000 each year in revenue. I have 3 online courses. I've launched the Birth Lounge membership that has had thousands of women go through it. I have an app. I've launched more than 20 online products that bring me passive income every single day, 300,000 followers on social media platforms, and a podcast with over 350,000 listeners. And most recently, I've started to dabble in brand partnerships, which brings me thousands of dollars each month. I want to teach you how you can do this too. I want to help you craft what you want your business to look like. If you don't want to be taking on 5 and 6 births a month, then don't. Let's create an online program that can put passive income into your pocket every single month where you get to spend more time with your family. If you're ready to niche down and only take a few clients a month, but you are ready to launch an online product that can help you make income in your sleep, let me show you how to do that. If you've been struggling to grow on social media, I have the recipes for going viral, and I want to teach them to you. There's an application in the show notes. This program is limited to just 10 spots. Class starts on May 5th. We will be doing discovery calls to make sure that the people who get into the program are the right fit, because I want to make sure that everyone in this program is not only successful, but you can actually grow your business. Visit the link in the show notes to apply today. And if you have additional questions, find me on social media at Tranquility by HeHe. Drop into my DMs and I can let you know if you are the right fit for our doula business accelerator. I literally cannot wait to share this with you guys. Bye. Alrighty, let's take this one on. This one is a little bit more complicated and it's going to be a little bit of a nuanced answer. Hi, I'm currently in the hospital trying to birth my baby. I'm 3 centimeters dilated after getting induced with a medication that they inserted in my cervix called Cervidil, and I stopped contracting after using it twice for 24 hours. They want to start Pitocin at 2 is what I heard the doctor say, but I declined. I want it all natural, and I'm currently 41 weeks and 3 days pregnant. Alrighty, let's break this down. So my first question is, are you there for a medical induction? It sounds like you're there for an elective induction and that there's no medical reason to induce. So that's where I'm going to go with this conversation. The next advice that I give and all the supporting evidence that I'm about to share with you would not necessarily be applicable for anyone who is having a medical induction. So with the next few things that I say for the remaining part of this question, please keep in mind that I am assuming that this is an elective induction and there's no medical reason for you or your baby to be being induced. So number one, let's talk about Cervidil. It's a prostaglandin. It is meant to help efface your cervix, which means make it very squishy and thin. We know that effacement is actually the very first part of labor, and while it's not talked about very often, it is a crucial part. Your cervix cannot dilate if it is thick and really tough. It must be thin and squishy in order for it to open up. Cervidil is just one cervical ripener, one prostaglandin. There's also another medication called Cytotec or misoprostol, and it's the same thing. It's another prostaglandin that is designed to efface your cervix, to make it nice and squishy and thin so that it can open up and dilate. Now, hospitals have different policies. Typically, you can have another cervical ripener every 4 to 6 hours, and each manufacturer is going to dictate how many you can have. So some of them say you can't exceed 4 doses. Some of them say you can't exceed 6 doses. This would be a really great question to ask your provider as you are having your discussion about induction options. That way you know what you are going to be faced with if you need a cervical ripener. Not all hospitals are going to have both options, and so that's probably a really good question for you to ask as well. In addition to that, keep in mind that we do see inductions be more successful, easier, and shorter if you have an effaced cervix before we start Pitocin. So if you find that your cervix is still really thick and closed and it's not squishy and thin, consider getting another dose of cervical ripener. Consider what the benefits there might be. One other thing to know, and something that our team has seen be very successful over the years, is changing cervical ripener. So you mentioned that you quit contracting after using it twice for 24 hours. Something that you could consider is changing to Cytotec or misoprostol. They're the same thing, same medication. to see if your cervix might respond a little differently, i.e., a little better, to a change in medication. One other thing to note about the contractions with the prostaglandins is not everyone's body is going to start contracting with the prostaglandins. Sometimes you have multiple rounds of Cervidil or Cytotec and you never experience contractions until you actually start Pitocin, which is a drug that is designed to bring on uterine contractions. My final thought about the cervical ripener and the 2 doses and you stopping contraction is, should you go home? Is this your body telling you that you don't need to have an induction, that it's not ready to be in labor? I tend to think with elective inductions that there is a line in the sand and you get to draw your own line. Where will that line be? What line in the sand are you willing and not willing to cross? And how hard do you want to push your body into an induction? If you really have to, and keep it in mind that this is an elective induction, if you really have to push and push and push your body to get into labor, it really begs the question, is your body meant to be in labor right now? Is your baby ready to be born right now? Or should you go home and rest, wait for spontaneous labor, or even come back in a couple of days and attempt an induction again later? Now let's tackle the question of they want to start Pitocin at 2, but you declined. Now, we talked about previously that you could ask for a different version of prostaglandin to see if your body responded better. We also talked about that maybe you decided you don't want to push your body any harder and you're just going to pack up and go home. If neither one of those are an option or you're not interested in either one of those, the next logical answer would be Pitocin use. When you say they want to start Pitocin at 2, it's unclear if you mean 2 milliunits or 2 p.m. I'm going to assume that you mean 2 milliunits, which to that, I really applaud your hospital. That is a really low starting dose of Pitocin. And from there, something you want to consider is how often do you bump up your Pitocin and by how much? So how much are you actually increasing the Pitocin? Are you going to go from 2 to 3 and then from 3 to 4? Sometimes hospitals have policies where they bump you up by 2 or 3 milliunits at a time, and some hospitals double it. So you would go from 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. And if you are on a 15-minute schedule, that means every 15 minutes, they're doubling your Pitocin. So within 1 hour, you have gone from a dose of 2 to 16. That's a really incredible jump, and you're almost guaranteed to feel the effects of that. Not only are you going to feel the contractions, but they may be a little bit stronger and more intense than what you were prepared for because the body does not naturally increase oxytocin like that. Not only is oxytocin cyclical, meaning that it gives you a dose and then it stops and lets your body just hang out there, and then it gives you a big surge and then it takes it away and it stops and it lets your body acclimate to that amount of oxytocin, and then it gives you a big dose and then it takes it away. And it doesn't necessarily take it away, but it's not a continuous uphill dose or surge of oxytocin. Your oxytocin is going to surge and then it's going to wane, and then it's going to surge, and then it's going to wane. And you can see that with synthetic Pitocin and hospital protocol, that is not what we are replicating. I don't know that it's actually possible to replicate that surge and wane that the body will naturally do. And unfortunately, That's just one of the risks of having synthetic Pitocin administered in your labor. We're unable to really replicate very closely what the body's natural administration of oxytocin would be like. However, one thing you can do is do a low and slow approach. So instead of allowing your hospital staff to double your dose, you do just bump it up by 1 or 2 milliunits at a time. And instead of following a 15-minute schedule, maybe you opt for something like a 30 or 60-minute schedule. One of the common pushbacks that you're going to receive or hear from the hospital staff is that this may lead to a longer induction. And while that is true, 2 other things are also true. Your body will probably much appreciate a slower ramp up of Pitocin, and you're going to drastically reduce your risk of what's called tachysystole, which is where your uterus is contracting way too much, too often, too intense, and that often requires additional intervention like a medication called terbutaline, because your baby is not able to handle that. And so then we also are very worried about your baby's heart rate. Pitocin is the #1 misused drug on L&D units, and inappropriate Pitocin use is one of the top reasons for C-sections and birth trauma in the US. I want to follow that up by saying Pitocin is not a bad drug, and it absolutely has a place in labor. However, what we commonly see is that it is used without intention and without respect, and that's one thing that you have absolute control over, whether you consent to additional Pitocin and how often, how frequent you consent to Pitocin. One thing that you really want to have a conversation with your nurse about is please do not increase my Pitocin without my explicit consent. If I'm resting, napping, or sleeping, do not wake me up. And also, I do not consent for you to up my Pitocin. Wait until I'm awake, and then we can have an explicit discussion on whether I am ready for an additional dose of Pitocin. If and when you feel like your contractions are strong enough, frequent enough, and close enough, and long enough, if and when you feel like your contractions are strong enough, frequent enough, and long enough, then you can consider 2 things. Maybe you turn off the Pitocin, or maybe you just maintain the dose that you're at. If you maintain the dose that you're at, you typically will see your contractions continue as they are, or they may even get stronger because your body's natural oxytocin is working in addition to the synthetic Pitocin that's being administered into your system. If you decide to turn it off, there is a chance that your contractions slow or completely go away. And in that case, you would simply turn it back on. If you decide to turn it back on, then you have an option about how you do that. Do you start back at a low dose and see exactly how much you need? Or do you start at the dose in which you turned it off from and just start there and go forward? There's so much to this Pitocin conversation, and I dive into it in depth in the birth lounge. It's something that I feel very passionate about because it is the #1 misused drug on L&D units in the US, and because it causes so much birth trauma. I really want you to feel empowered and in control of the decisions made around Pitocin use in your body. There's also really great data that shows once active labor has been achieved, we actually do see less C-section rates and less interventions be used if we turn off the Pitocin. This is something I learned from my friend Jen, who I call the Pitocin Queen, and you can hear her interview on the Birth Lounge podcast in episode 288, where we actually talk about how Pitocin metabolizes in your system, how it impacts your labor and contraction patterns, and what the data says about appropriate and safe Pitocin use in labor. All right, you guys, let's hit up the last question here. If you are GBS positive, is it true that you need to bathe the baby right away so you're not further exposed to the strep? Absolutely not. That is completely false. If one of your healthcare professionals has told you this, it is not true. Absolutely not true. That's not how Group B strep is spread. And the other thing to know is that most of us already have Group B strep inside of us. It's just a cyclical bacteria inside of us that we all live with. It doesn't necessarily make you sick, and you don't necessarily feel sick. We get worried about babies being exposed to it inside the uterus because they are actually breathing in amniotic fluid. And so if that fluid has GBS in it, then we run the risk of them developing sepsis or pneumonia once they are on the outside, which is why it is recommended to have antibiotics administered during labor. A really great resource for this is going to be the evidence-based births article on Group B strep. Dr. Rebecca Decker does a really awesome job of breaking down all the data, plus all of your options, plus she talks about what other countries do as far as testing in prenatal period and what they do as far as antibiotic administration during labor and the approaches they use there. That way, you know that you have other options and you can evaluate you and your baby's risk. So you absolutely do not need to bathe your baby right away after labor. You can still follow the same rules as normal, which is 24 to 48 hours in the hospital, or even longer if you decide to decline that and do your first bath at home. One other resource I do want to mention before we wrap up is the sepsis calculator, the newborn sepsis calculator from Kaiser Permanente. It is found online. I'll link it in the show notes for you. That way you can evaluate your baby's risk if you have GBS and you decide to decline antibiotics, or you have a labor that is precipitous, so labor that's too fast, that you actually don't get the option or the time to administer antibiotics in labor before your baby arrives. All right, you guys. It's always so much fun hanging out with you guys, and I love all your questions on the internet, and I absolutely hate that I can't get to them all, but it does give us a really fun opportunity to connect on the podcast where I can just do a really kind of hot seat speed dating round of questions, one after the other. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. As always, I will see you in the next episode. Be sure to connect with me on social media at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Drop me a DM. Let me know how you like today's episode. Be sure to drop any questions that you have so that I can answer them in stories or in a post or even in a future episode just like this. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.